holy? Does it mean primarily that morally we cross every T and dot every I? Well, we need to be morally pure, but that's not the full meaning of holiness. Holiness means that we ought to be separated unto God. When God has made us holy or sanctified us, in one sense, He separates us from the world and He calls us to Himself. Do you see that? The man who is holy is not necessarily the man who dots every I and crosses every T, because he could be a Pharisee whose goal or idol is morality. But the man who is holy is the man whose heart is separated unto God. He desires to know God. He desires to be with God. Everything else can pass away for as far as he's concerned. He wants God. He esteems God and a relationship with God and communion with God above absolutely everything else. That is why we see something so special in King David. Now, it would have helped for him to be not quite as wild, possibly. He wasn't the greatest example at times. He committed some heinous sins that we do not want to take lightly. But at the same time, he was a man after God's own heart. He'd just as soon live in that temple in the presence of God as be anywhere else. One day in your courts are better than 1,000 elsewhere. And so don't think just because you're religious or pietistic or moral that you're holy. Now, the one who loves God keeps God's commandments. And we ought to be unstained and unspotted by this world. But at the same time, do not equate morality with holiness. It's just a part of what holiness means. Do you have a sense of being separated unto God, of belonging to Him? And does your heart follow with that calling? Do you desire to be with God? You just hear Charles Leiter say quite a bit. He'd say, true believers are not so much afraid of going to hell as they're afraid of not being with Christ. And so when He made them holy, what did He? He separated them from the nations and said, all right, you belong to me. You belong to me. Now, a good illustration of this is marriage. Before my wedding day, my relationships were much different than after my wedding day. Before my wedding day, I knew girls that weren't my bride-to-be. No one would scoff if they saw me sitting in a park after church with a girl talking about Scripture. Be no problem going and get a Coke with some girl. I mean, it's just completely different. I'm kind of open to all sorts of different individuals of the opposite sex prior to my marriage. The day I got married, not only did my relationship with the woman I married change, but my relationship with every other woman on the face of the earth changed. Do you see that? I was cut off from them in order to be with only one. That's what happened when you were converted. That's what happened to the nation of Israel. Now also notice this, that while I was single, if I had dated around to a whole bunch of girls, I would have been known as what they used to call a dandy. I would have been known maybe as, some kind of guy who just is with the girls all the time. But it wouldn't have been a tremendous scandal, at least not in our day and age, for a single man to be with one girl and out to dinner with her, and then maybe next month out to dinner with another girl. That wouldn't have been a tremendous scandal. But after I was married, if I had just looked at another woman, it would have been a terrible scandal. You see, the moment I said I do, not only my relationship with my wife changed, my relationship with every other woman on the face of the earth changed. I belonged to somebody now, to the exclusion of everybody else. Now that's what's going on here. Look what he says. You are a holy people to the Lord. You belong to me. I have separated you. Now, another thing it says here, they were a peculiar treasure among the nations and the recipients of his special grace. According to 1 Peter 2:9, the same may be said of the New Testament church. That God would call a people to himself is the greatest privilege he could offer them. There is a sense in which the greatest thing God can do for you is to give you the greatest gift. The greatest gift he can give you is himself. We hear a lot of emotionally charged psychobabble today, about persons saying, I'm afraid to love. I'm not sure that's a very true statement. I think it would be more correct to say I'm too selfish to love. But we say, I'm afraid to love. I'm afraid to open myself up to someone because they just might walk all over me, and I can't take that kind of hurt again. Now, even though I don't agree with that language, there is some truth in that. To open yourself up and call someone into your life and then have that person not respond properly is a great travesty. When a person opens up their life to you and you do not respond properly and you take advantage of that and you do not appreciate it and you walk all over it, that's a terrible thing. Well, realize the privilege that has been granted unto you, that God has invited you to be his people. He's made it possible through the atoning death of his Son. He has regenerated your heart. He has given you all sorts of special promises. He's invited you to the table. You ought to be very, very cautious the way you live. Your life should not be driven by the desire of being moral. That can be an idol in itself. Your life ought to be driven, your morality ought to be driven by a desire not to offend the one who has demonstrated such love toward you. Do you see, guys?